Hi everyone, this is Hana, and welcome back to my island. There was a time when I would go abroad, meet people, and tell them I'm from Korea. And 9 times out of 10, the same question would come back: North or South? Then almost always the joke would follow. Oh, so you know Kim Jong-un? They said it with a smile like a joke. So it felt strange to get angry. And it felt strange to sit them down and explain. So most of the time, I just smile too and let it go. In some countries, there is a whole culture of treating everything as a joke. They mock, they put things down, they wave them away, and they call it brilliant satire. Some people told me with a straight face the Korean was too dangerous to visit. There was a video that went around online for a while. Someone stopped people on the street in America and asked them a simple question. Most of them said the biggest threat to America was North Korea. Then the interviewer laid out a map of the world and asked them to point to where Korea was. Many of them could not put their fingers anywhere at all. So now, once I get to know a friend from another country a little, I ask them this. Do you know why Korea was split into North and South? How it happened? And who actually did it? Almost no one can really answer. They don't care and they don't really know. But they still feel free to make the joke. There are even people who can't find Korea on a map, who know nothing about us, and who have no idea what their own country did to us. And those same people will scold me. They will say America saved Korea from the evil of communist China and North Korea, and that we just don't know how to be grateful enough. And then they defend film and stand-up comedy that mock North Korea, Kim Jong-un, and ordinary North Korean people by calling it satire and free speech. Not long ago, when President Trump made a state visit to China, there were children in the Chinese welcome party. An American stand-up comedian said the kids look as happy as iPhone factory workers on a day off. And this was a comedian whose own show was about to be canceled under pressure from the Trump administration. Well, I don't really want to blame them. Where you stand change what you see. And the world only looks as big as the part of it you happen to know. If anything, I want to invite these people into a conversation. We usually sum it up in one quick line. There's poor North Korea with its dictator, and there's a South Korea that grew so fast. Same blood, one country, split in two. I want to invite people to look with me at how deep and how long the real story is. Because it's a story about people. War and division can never be a joke, because they are about human lives. In August 1945, Japan announced its defeat. For 35 years, the Japanese Empire had ruled the Korean peninsula. When it suddenly vanished, it left a huge hole where the power used to be. The question of who would fill the empty space set America and the Soviet Union against each other. That's when the 38th parallel suddenly appeared. Two American Army colonels spread out a National Geographic map and drew the line in about 30 minutes. That line cut straight across the middle of the Korean peninsula. It said nothing about the people who live there, nothing about the shape of the mountain and rivers, nothing about where villages and families began and ended. It was just a mark on paper drawn to make it easier for armies to divide up the work. And of course, not a single Korean was in the room. An empire taking a ruler and drawing a line across the land was not something that happened only in Korea. Earlier in 1884, representatives from several European countries and the United States met in Berlin, Germany, and split up the continent of Africa among themselves. There wasn't a single African in that room either. The straight lines they drew on the table cut single tribes in two, and forced the tribes who had been enemies into one country. Between 1884 and 1914, the share of Africa held by Europe grew from about 10% to nearly 90%. Those lines are still the seeds of civil war and conflict in Africa today, and the rich resources of that continent still flow out to its former colonial rulers. The 38th parallel in Korea and the borders in Africa are the same thing, happening on different continents. One line drawn by a powerful country for its own convenience leaves a long, deep pain on the people who live on that land. Two continents bear witness to this, side by side. Go back a little further, in 1943, in Cairo, the United States, Britain, and China met and promised to give Korea its independence in due course. That sounds nice, but the side that got to decide what in due course meant was not Korea. It was the big powers. After the liberation, America and the Soviet Union pushed for a plan to govern Korea themselves for a set period of time. They called it trusteeship. But the two sides wanted different things from the very start, so the talks finally fell apart. The Soviet Union wanted to build a country on its side of the line. America wanted a fence to stop communism from spreading. Korea's independence was not urgent to either of them. Here is the part that hurts the most. Korea already had a government set up back in 1919, the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea. It was born from the spirit of the March 1st movement, and for 27 years, it moved from place to place across China, leading the fight for independence. But when liberation came and its leaders tried to return home, America refused to recognize them as a government. They were told to come back not as a government, but only as private citizens. We clearly had people ready to run our own house. And we were told that even on the day of our own liberation, that seat was not ours to take. Korea didn't have a seat at the table. Korea was more like an object laid out on top of it. The line drawn in 30 minutes led to war in just 5 years. The Korean War in 1950. People spoke the same language and ate the same food, pointed guns at each other. For 3 years, millions were killed, wounded, or scattered. In July 1953, the guns finally fell silent. But the people who signed that agreement were General Mark Clark, the commander of the UN forces, Peng Do-hwai, the commander of the Chinese forces, and Kim Il-sung of North Korea. South Korea's name was not there. The president at the time, Lee Seung-man, refused to sign right to the end. His reason was that he could not accept ending the war without reaching reunification. Let me make one thing very clear. What was made in 1953 was an armistice, an agreement to stop the fighting for now. It was not a peace treaty, an agreement to end the war. So even now, more than 70 years later, the South and the North are still, in legal terms, at war. We only put our guns down for a moment. The war has never actually ended. And here's the painful irony. Lee Seung-man refused to sign because he could not give up reunification. And because of that choice, South Korea was left out for more than 70 years, even from the documents that ended the war fought on its own soil. In 1994, even China stepped away from the armistice system. The only parties really left in the agreement now are North Korea and the United States. It is a war between one people, and yet that one people still cannot get a seat at the table to end it. And this same pattern is repeating even now. As of 2026, Korea is trying to get back its wartime operational control from the United States. That means the right to command our own military with our own hands if a war breaks out. And America's answer is always the same: when you are ready. It's the same thing they said in Cairo in 1943 when they said, in due course. And we are still not the ones who get to decide whether we are ready. Only the wording has changed. The setup is the same as it was 80 years ago. Someone other than us still gets to judge our fate and hand out permission. The same is true when America sits down directly with North Korea to talk about ending the war. President Trump calls North Korea a great nuclear power and keeps saying he will meet Kim Jong-un again. A declaration to end the war, talks between South and North, a peace agreement, all of it has become something that can only happen if Washington decides to move. And we, the people who actually live on this land, are left standing off to the side, helping their meeting happen. Even our own president Lee Jae-myung once compared Trump to a peacemaker and described himself as the pacemaker running alongside, helping to set the pace. The key that holds the fate of the Korean peninsula is not on the peninsula. It is across the sea. And 80 years on, that reality still hasn't changed. So why does this keep happening? When you really think it through, the answer is clear. The big powers around us do not want a Korea where South and North are joined into one. Let's imagine it. What kind of country would a reunified Korea be? We would have the economic strength and advanced technology that South Korea has built, one of the world's largest economies. Its military is currently ranked 5th in the world. And North Korea has a large workforce, plus world-class underground resources like rare earth and uranium. Add the populations of South and North together, and we get 76 million people, more than Britain or France. Now add in the nuclear weapons and missile technology that North Korea has. Reunified Korea could become a far stronger country than it is now. And it's exactly the possibility that would make 4 countries try to block reunification any way they can. America would lose its reason to keep US troops in Korea and its military foothold in Northeast Asia. It also can't be sure how long a reunified Korea would stay on America's side. China fears more than anything a strong country friendly with America sitting right on its border. Right now, North Korea works as a fence between China and the United States. Japan is uneasy about a Korea that would speak far more boldly on history and on Japan's territorial claims. And Russia, too, does not want a country leaning toward the West right across its border. A divided Korea is the level the big powers hold and shake. But a Korea made whole gets to be the hand that holds it. That's why one line drawn on a map 8 years ago is still doing its job today. But on the other side of the line, there is an old dream. And there's a long line of people who never let go of it. At the very front of the line stands Kim Gu. He was a freedom fighter and the head of the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea. In 백범일지, his memo, and his essay, My Wish, he wrote this. I want our country to be the most beautiful country in the world. I do not want it to be the strongest or the richest. Because I have felt the pain of being invaded by others, I do not want my country to invade anyone. Let our wealth be enough to live comfortably. Let our strength be enough to keep others from attacking us. That is plenty. The one thing I want without limit is the power of culture. Because the power of culture makes us happy and through us gives happiness to others. What people lack today is not military force. It is not money either. We could have all the natural science in the world and it would be fine. But even the science we have now is more than enough to live in comfort. The real reason people are unhappy today is that there is not enough goodness, not enough mercy, not enough love. If only this spirit could grow, then with the things we already have, 2 billion people could all live in peace. And the only thing that grows this spirit is culture. I do not want my country to copy others. I want our country to be the resource, the goal, the model of this new and higher culture, so that true world peace may begin in our country and through us become real for the whole world. He wrote this in 1947. Can you believe it? Right after liberation, America began moving to hold a separate election in the South only and to set up a separate government there. Kim-gu saw clearly that this would split the peninsula in two forever and finally drag it into war. In 1948, he published a piece called Tearfully Appealing to 30 Million Fellow Koreans. In it, he declared that he would rather fall dead across the 38th parallel trying to build one united country than lift a finger to help build a divided government for his own comfort. And then, an old man over 70, he crossed the 38th parallel himself and headed for Pyongyang. It was his last desperate effort to stop the country from being torn apart. You could call him the true mother in the old story of King Solomon, the one who would rather give up the child than see it cut in two. He said he could not leave the 38th parallel drawn by foreign armies in place for even one moment. But by then, setting up separate governments in the South and the North had already hardened into the path forward. His effort never bore fruit. Kim-gu was assassinated the following year, and his stubborn hope for one united country was left unfinished. Half a century later, in June 2000, President Kim Dae-jung set foot in Pyongyang. It was the first time since the division in 1948 that the leaders of the South and the North sat face to face and shook hands. The leaders of two countries that had pointed their guns at each other for 50 years finally met in one place. And they made their promise not on the ground of ideology, but on the ground of being one people, promising to make peace and to open up to each other. For this meeting and for his long walk down the road of democracy, he received the Nobel Peace Prize that year. After that, families that had been torn apart held one another again, and the road to Mountain Kumgang opened up. Then, in 2003, former President Roh Moo-hyun said in his inaugural speech that the Korean peninsula must be reborn as a peaceful gate connecting the Eurasian continent and the Pacific. He spoke of a day when you could buy a train ticket in Busan, pass through Pyongyang and Siniju, cross China and Mongolia and Russia, and arrive in the heart of Europe. It was a picture of broken rail lines joined back together with the peninsula as the starting point of the road reaching out of the continent. To the big powers, the Korean peninsula is a good level to shake. To us, the peninsula is the start of the road out into the world. Two completely different pictures drawn over the same piece of land. The deeper tragedy of the Korean peninsula is that the line did not stop at the land. The line came inside people's hearts. The division worked its way inward, and it gave rise to terrible things. The Jeju April 3rd incident, the Gwangju May 18th democracy movement, and many more. Countless ordinary people lost their lives to state violence with a label stuck on them. Red, spy, communist. For standing up to the government or simply for thinking differently, you got that red label. And once it was on you, you were no longer a person who deserved protection. Every act of violence begins with words before a single gun goes off. First, the words spread, the ones that turn the other person into something less than human. A monster, a rioter, a red, a communist. Only after that does someone pull the trigger. I grew up watching those words grow with my own eyes. From elementary school, we were made to watch anti-communist film together as a group. We drew anti-communist posters. We were sent to anti-communist essay contest. On buses, on subways, in every public place, there were huge signs telling you the number to call to report a spy. Others would call anyone who thought differently from them a red at the drop of a hat, and the children copied the word exactly. Those words are still alive today. These days, online, young children spread hate as if it were a game. They praise Lee Seung-man, Park Jong-hee, Chun Do-hwan, the men responsible during the years of military dictatorship, and they call anyone on the other side a red. Not long ago, an image that inserted the May 18th democracy movement spread online using a Starbucks Korea promotion as an excuse. It came from the same root. BTS, who the whole world admires, get attacked in Korea as leftist. In the winter of 2024, a neo-fascist movement shouting anti-communism and hate China tried to carry out the December 3rd insurrection. As people poured into the squares to stand against this attempt to drag the country back toward dictatorship, singers and filmmakers who had prepaid for warm coffee and food for them were branded as leftist and reds. The K-pop star singer IU, who brought coffee in advance for the citizens and fans standing in the cold square with their light sticks, had unspeakable things thrown at her. So did the director Park Chan-wook, who spoke up against that attempt. IU is still dealing with rumors that she is Chinese and with all kinds of hateful words. This hate has a family tree. At first, the enemy was North Korea and communism. But once the habit of making an enemy gets into you, it stops caring who the target is. Anti-China quietly becomes hate China. The pride that says my country is the best grows into looking down on everyone else. And so it spreads on and on. Hatred of people from certain country, hatred of women, hatred of people with disabilities, hatred of sexual minorities, hatred of laborers. When you trace it back, Korean society's hatred of the vulnerable flows out of this old conflict that began 80 years ago. As the times changed, only the tool carrying it changed, from paper posters to digital videos. The core is exactly the same. You, who don't think the way I do, should disappear. This is where the true face of fascism shows itself. And here is the most frightening part. A person who hates someone out of conviction can at least be reasoned with. But a person who joins in the hate for fun, for the pleasure of belonging to the group, doesn't even feel what they are doing. The philosopher Hannah Arendt said that great evil isn't the work of demons. It carries out by ordinary people who just do their part without thinking. What children are doing online right now puts them right at the doorway to that. The most miserable part is that many of the people pouring out this hate feel like victims themselves. They feel the world is pushing them out and taking away their voice. And sometimes that grievance is real. But the place they should be aiming their arrows is somewhere else entirely. The path is set up so their anger gets aimed instead at the most defenseless people around them. The most invisible and most expensive price the division make us pay is this. It made people build a checkpoint inside our own minds. When you are held down by guns or by law, you can see it. There is something to fight against. But when a person starts to censor their own thoughts and judges inside themselves whether a word is even allowed to be spoken, the oppressor is no longer needed. The system has moved inside a person and settled in on its own. For a long time, we were taught that we had to lean on America and Japan, or on the other side, that we had to lean on China and Russia, that we had to pick one of the two and take its hand to survive. The old mindset of Joseon serving the bigger country was carved into our bodies again through the colonial years and through a division made by the big powers. Once that frame settles into your mind, even questioning it starts to feel unsafe. And this problem doesn't stay in foreign policy. The self-censorship the division created has built a society where before you say anything, you first have to prove, which side am I on? Before you make any argument, you start calculating. Will this sound like a red? Will it look pro-America, pro-Japan, pro-China? The moment you start doing that math, your thinking isn't free anymore because you start looking for the safe thing to say instead of the things you actually want to say. And I see this again and again online, all over the world. Putting people into camps and slapping labels on them is not a habit unique to Korea. When someone criticizes America and Trump, people call them leftist or anti-American. It's like a contest to see who can pin a nickname fastest. Criticize the killing Israel is carrying out in Gaza, and they call you anti-Israel. Criticize the war in Ukraine, and they call you anti-Russia. You gave one opinion on one issue, and right away people shove you into one or two boxes, pro or anti, and sort out whether you're a friend or an enemy first. Then, after jumping to that quick, loose conclusions, they go straight at the person they've decided is the enemy. One person is not that simple. You can disagree with one of Trump's policies and nod along to another. You can criticize the Israel government's military operation and still not hate Jewish people. Criticizing a war does not mean taking the side of one country. Thinking about how complicated a person is. Inside one person, countless thoughts and contradictions live together. But the label erases all of the complexity in one stroke. Defining a person with a single word, scoring them, sorting them as an enemy if they are not on my side, that means you've stopped thinking and let emotion fill that space instead. Scholars have a name for this state. They call it affective polarization. It means your hatred for the other side grows bigger than your love for your own. When that hatred deepens, the other person stops being a person and becomes a devil. And we already know from history the horrifying things people will do to those they see as devil. The 2021 attacks on the US Capitol repeated itself in Brazil 2 years later, almost identically. Thousands of supporters of former President Bolsonaro, unable to accept the result of an election they lost, stormed Brazil's Congress, Supreme Court, and President Palace all at once and smashed everything. And in the early hours of January 19th, 2025, when an arrest warrant was issued for former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who faced the charges of leading an insurrection through the illegal martial law on December 3rd, hundreds of his supporters broke into the Seoul Western District Court. In a court, the last strongholds that protects the law, they smashed the windows and turned their violence on police and reporters. Nothing like it had happened in our constitutional history before. The funniest thing about the label is how little is actually inside it. In Korea, there are plenty of people who call themselves democratic and progressive while leading the way in hatred of women and sexual minorities. They've pinned the progressive label to their chest, but the actual content of that label, the part about standing with the vulnerable, is empty. There's no philosophy, no real thought. There's only ideology and picking sides. When the label takes the place where real belief should be, a person only checks which side they are on. They stop asking what they actually believes. In this Korea, I see the shadow of America. Dividing people into camps and labeling them is an old human habit found in every country. But the reason it took such bitter root in Korea is that the Cold War mindset America brought in. If you're not with us, you're against us, runs deep here. And now the internet has been added on top. The language and the method of picking sides flow straight in off the screen. And America and Korea are now fighting the same fight in the same language. Just as a line drawn across the sea was carved into our land and our hearts, the grammar of hate made across the sea is now working inside us in exactly the same way. This matters even more in the age of artificial intelligence. We now live in a time when the ability to ask a good question matters more than the ability to memorize information. The question you ask decides the answer you get. But a person with a checkpoint in their mind keeps their questions narrow. They only ask within the fence that's already been allowed. This is why Korea, even while the whole world loves its K-pop, dramas, and films, still hasn't moved an inch when it comes to politics and how we understand our own history. The areas where creativity exploded were, for the most part, the ones relatively free from ideological censorship. But lately, a small change has started to show in Korea. After the December 3rd insurrection of 2024, the citizens impeached the president who had declared martial law and set up a new government with our own hands. That government now holds an approval rating that has no precedent. The Korea of today rejects the old frame itself, the one that demands you choose between America or China. It has declared that it will get along well with all of them, with America, with China, with Japan, and with Russia, in whatever way serves our own interest. And it is actually doing this. It grows closer to America while still demanding our wartime command back. It cooperates with Japan while drawing a clear line on questions of history and the military. It keeps up exchanges with China while still saying what needs to be said about things like the structures in the West Sea. I remember a scene from a Korea-China summit a few months ago. President Xi Jinping of China gave our president a pair of Xiaomi smartphones as a gift, and our president asked, "Is the communication on this secure?" Xi shot back as a joke, "Why don't you check whether there's a backdoor open?" A while later, when our president visited China, he brought along that very phone he'd been given, and the two leaders took a selfie together with it. It was an incredible historical scene. No Korean president before this had ever built a relationship like this with a Chinese leader. Still, I have to be honest about one thing. Even with the relationship this much improved, with the cultural and economic exchange busy again, China still keeps its mouth shut on the very thing we want most, which is for China to step forward with us on the North Korea problem. China gets along nicely with the Korea and takes the practical gains, but it holds the North Korea card close, playing it carefully and deliberately to use as leverage in its power struggle with America. This part reminds us again that the key to the Korean peninsula is not yet fully in our hands. Still, just by starting to refuse head on for the first time the demand to pick one of the two, we may be taking the first step toward tearing down the checkpoint inside our minds. Here, I think we have to ask ourselves an uncomfortable questions. Were we really only victims? Only ones who were wronged by the big powers? No. We've also been the ones doing the harm. Korean troops sent to the Vietnam War took part in killing civilians there. In several villages in central Vietnam, people who had done nothing lost their lives. 3 Korean presidents admitted this was wrong and offered steady expressions of regret and apology. Former President Kim Dae-jung, Roh Moo-hyun, and Moon Jae-in. All 3 were expressions of regret and apology, but each one was worded indirectly. And there are reasons and circumstances behind this. First, the Vietnamese government itself did not welcome the apology much. Vietnam, as the country that won the war, said there were no real reason for it to receive an apology. Also, that war was partly a civil war, where Vietnamese people themselves were split into North and South and fought each other. So the Vietnamese government worried that if the killings by Korean troops were highlighted, their own internal conflict would be dragged out into the open. On top of that, there were other countries that had joined the war too, like America, Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand. So those countries felt uneasy about Korea being the only one stepping forward to apologize. And above all, the ones who killed the most civilians in the Vietnam War were the American troops. If America says nothing and Korea apologizes, people would ask why this standard applies only to Korea, and that could send complicated ripples through the relationship between Vietnam and America. For these reasons, Korea's apology to Vietnam was not widely reported in Western media. But here is something we have to separate out. The position of the Vietnamese government and the heart of each individual victims there are likely 2 different things. You can't paper over the deep grief of victims with the math between governments. We know all too well how easily a nation's big story erased the life of a single person inside it. A wounded person wounds another person. If you don't properly look at the pain you've been through and work it out, that pain will always flow somewhere, usually toward someone weaker than you. When we ask Japan for a sincere apology, our demand carries real weight only when we can hold ourselves to the same standard toward Vietnam. A standard that's generous to me and strict only toward others ends up repeating the very structure I was criticizing. Standing in front of the mirror is painful. The stronger your sense of yourself as a victim, the more it hurts. But facing the pain instead of running from it is what it really means to see people as people. If it's hard to explain with your head what the division of one people really means, we have films that makes you feel it. If you line them up by when their stories take place, 5 films become the history of the division itself. At the very front line is Taegukgi, the Brotherhood of War. It's 1950, right in the heart of the war that broke out. 2 close brothers end up standing on opposite sides of ideology until they finally point their guns at each other. The tragedy of having to kill one another, dragged into a fight over the big powers' ideologies without even knowing why, becomes clear in the collapse of one family. Welcome to Dongmakgol deals with the same wartime moment, but its stage is a deep mountain village far from the front lines. South Korean soldiers, North Korean soldiers, and a UN soldier drift into the village, forget their ideology, and mix together as people of one village. That moment when the line between enemy and allies disappears is a fantasy in the film, but at the same time, it's the deep wish of all of us. The front line shows a battle over a hilltop in 1953, just before the Armistice. Knowing full well that war is about to end, people keep dying over one nameless peak. The emptiness of war that grinds people down with no real cause, and the sight of people wearing away inside it hits you in the chest. Silmido looks at the late 1960s and early 1970s after the war. It shows how nation uses each person as a tool in the name of ideology, then throws them away once they are no longer useful. Last, Joint Security Area is set at Panmunjom in the late 1990s. In an era where the armistice had hardened into daily lives, soldiers from the south and the north, who were supposed to meet as enemies, secretly share a friendship. As people, they became friends, but the structure finally pushes them into tragedy. Even inside a system that turns people into something less than people, their humanity still blooms. And there's the sorrow of watching it get trampled. It's also worth noticing that as we moved into the 2020s, the way we picture the division is changing. In Crash Landing on You, the division is drawn as the backdrop of a love story, a kind of fantasy. Escape from Mogadishu is based on the true story of South and North Korean diplomats risking their lives together to escape in the heart of the Somali civil war. And it captures what it feels like for people of the same blood to meet outside the border. Films like The Berlin File, Confidential Assignments, and Human pull the division into the genre of spy action. This change can be read in two ways. It could mean that enough time has passed for the fear of division to fade. And at the same time, it could be a sign that such a heavy tragedy is turning into light entertainment. Because the generation that remembered that war as something real is slowly leaving this world. Either way, the question these films ask comes down to one thing. How will we remember this tragedy? Right in the center of this huge sweep of history, there are people who face that storm with nothing to shield them. People with names and faces. Someone's child, someone's parent, someone's sibling, someone's friend. Not long ago, a Korean current affairs program went to find two young North Korean soldiers. They had been sent to the war between Ukraine and Russia and were taken prisoner by the Ukrainian army. Those young men spoke the same language as us, missed the same food, and longed to see their mothers. The faces they showed when it was time to part, holding back tears, not wanting to go. Those young men probably never did understand why they had to pick up a gun on the faraway soil of Ukraine. Ideology has always belonged to the people at the very top, and the gun is always carried by the people at the very bottom. The tragedy didn't end just because the gunfire stopped on the battlefield. The reality these young men now face, held in a camp in Ukraine, is as brutal as a battlefield full of flying bullets. The North Korean regime keeps a system so harsh that it forces its soldiers to take their own lives rather than be captured by the enemy. So for those men, returning to their home in North Korea would mean immediate execution and death. Faced with this cruel fate, where the price of throwing down their guns to live is having to hand over their lives again, the two young men have desperately asked to be sent to South Korea as their only path to survival. And here we come face to face once again with the merciless real face of international politics. Most observers believe the Ukrainian government won't accept these men's request for asylum right away on humanitarian grounds. Instead, it's trying to use them as a card to draw out diplomatic deals or military support from the Korean government. A single person's desperate plea to leave has been reduced to a bargaining tool on the cold table of diplomacy, where the interests of nations are weighed against each other. Young men who barely survived a battlefield that have become a proxy war between great powers are now, once again, being treated as pieces on a geopolitical chessboard. 8 years ago, that same old biological power split the Korean peninsula in half and trampled countless individual lives. And now, in 2026, it hangs over the fate of two young North Korean men held in Ukraine just the same. In the face of huge national interest and a violent system, the first thing to be sacrificed and erased is always the ordinary human being with their own name and their own warmth. But I have always seen with my own eyes in the same era that the human hearts in the end cannot be broken. In the winter of 2024, when there was an attempt to roll democracy back, the thing that stopped it was not the army. It was the citizens who came out into the squares. People who stood in the cold street, each holding their own light stick. People who shared something warm with one another. That was their strength. A long history of oppression had instead built up the strength to resist. The same strength that ran from April 19th to May 18th, from the June struggle to the candlelight, moved once again that winter. I want to end this long story in the smallest and most private place I can. My grandfather and my great uncle came south, fleeing from the north during the Korean War. They thought they were only stepping out of harm's way for a little while, that they would soon be able to go back. But that little while became a whole life. Both of them went to their graves without ever setting foot on their home soil again, and without ever seeing the family they left behind. In the middle of poverty, my grandfather got through the years of an alcohol, fell ill, and passed away. My great uncle followed his son to America and closed his eyes in Philadelphia. I'm the granddaughter of displaced people, but my grandfather died when I was so young that I have no memory of hearing this story directly from him. And yet, somehow, something pulls at me from inside my blood. Not long ago, I asked my father and got the address of my grandfather's family home in the north. If reunification ever comes far in the future, and if by then my father is gone too, I plan to take the address even on my own and go to find my grandfather's hometown and my relatives there at least once. Article 3 of the Constitution of the Republic of Korea states, "The territory of the Republic of Korea shall consist of the Korean Peninsula and its adjacent islands." The Supreme Court and the Constitution Court defined the North Korean regime as an illegal group that seizes our territory without right and exercises governing power over it as anti-state group. If you apply this legal reasoning, you reach the conclusion that the North Korean regime and the North Korean military are illegally occupying the area north of the peninsula. And Article 4 of the Constitution says the Republic of Korea shall seek reunification and shall formulate and carry out a policy of peaceful reunification based on the basic order of free democracy. As anti-state group illegally occupying our territory under constitutional law and at the same time a recognized partner for dialogue and exchange within the practical reality of pursuing peaceful reunification and within international law. Our enemy is not the North Korean people. North Korea is our territory, and the people of North Korea are our own people. This is not some grand theory of reunification or some difficult ideology. It's a granddaughter holding to a chest the address of a hometown her grandfather knew, but she has never seen, wishing she could go and stand on that spot. The real face of what the division took from us is right here. So, if there is ever someone who tries to make a joke out of Korea's division, instead of getting angry, I want to tell them this story. That one line, drawn by someone in 30 Minutes 8 years ago, split apart people who spoke the same language. That it made an old man close his eyes longing for a home he could never return to. And that his granddaughter still lives with one worn address held close. The division of Korean Peninsula is not a story about politics and ideology. In the end, it is a story about people. And we have to keep telling this story. How did that land with you? I'd love to hear what you think about the Korean Peninsula and the Korean people, a single people divided in half for nearly a century, used as an instrument of hatred. Let's talk in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support my channel, you can become a member. This has been Hannah's Island. You're safe here now. Until we meet again, rest easy on the island that fits your own latitude. Take care. Bye.